So if you're flying in Russia right now, you're caught in what you could call a dual crisis. On one hand, you have very real, very external threats. We're talking drone attacks shutting down major airports. But then there's this other, almost invisible danger, a critical shortage of spare parts that is quietly eating away at the safety of the planes themselves. Let's break down how these two massive problems are crashing into each other to create one of the most hazardous airspaces in the world. Just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, picture this. On a single night back in April, Russian officials reported a massive wave of attacks. They claim they shot down 85 drones across multiple regions. I mean, think about that. 85. That is a staggering number for just one night. But this wasn't just some abstract military operation happening far from anyone. No, for civilians on the ground and, of course, for passengers in the sky, the consequences were real and they were immediate. Russia's airspace is, for all intents and purposes, becoming a front line, and the danger isn't just theoretical anymore. And these attacks had a real, tangible cost. And this is just what Russian officials reported from that one night. 1 person killed, 4 others injured in Taganrog. A foreign cargo ship was damaged, a factory worker was wounded, even a residential building got hit. This just shows you the real human impact of this war in the skies.
Now here's something you might not think about. The danger to civilian planes actually comes from 2 directions. Yeah, there's the risk from the drones themselves, but then you have the risk from the air defense systems that are trying to shoot them down. And those missiles, they can reach any altitude a commercial flight might be at.
And, it's not just us talking about this. This has led to some really serious international concern. An independent watchdog group called Safe Airspace has issued its highest possible warning for Russia. Risk level 1, do not fly. That is as serious as it gets. And look at the reason they give. The primary danger is the misidentification by air defense systems. They're genuinely worried about friendly fire hitting a passenger jet.
So what happens on the ground when all this is going on in the air? Total paralysis for the air travel system. The second drones are detected, authorities just shut everything down. And that triggers this huge cascade of delays and cancellations that just ripples across the entire country. And we're not talking about some tiny little airstrips out in the middle of nowhere. Just take a look at this list. These are major international hubs like Moscow and St. Petersburg, and really key airports in huge cities like Kazan and Samara. When these places shut down, a huge chunk of the country's travel network just stops.
Let's just zoom in on one example to see how bad this gets. The airport in St. Petersburg was shut down for 7 hours. The direct result of that? 40 flights delayed. Bam! Just like that. And that means thousands of passengers were stranded and schedules were thrown into absolute chaos across the entire network.
Okay, so that's the danger from the outside. That's the war happening in the sky. But there's a whole other crisis brewing, one that's way less visible but, well, potentially just as dangerous. It's not about what's in the sky, it's about what's happening to the planes themselves.
So where did this internal problem come from? Well, the root of it all goes back to those crippling international sanctions that were imposed back in 2022. They were designed to completely cut off Russia's aviation industry from the global supply chain, and as we're about to see, they've had a profound effect. You can really see how this whole thing just snowballed over time. It starts in 2022 when access to parts gets cut off. By the very next year, airlines are already having to cannibalize, literally stripping parts from some planes just to keep others flying. Then comes this huge blow. Bermuda and Ireland, where hundreds of these planes were officially registered, they revoked their airworthiness certificates. That's basically them saying, nope, we can't vouch for these planes anymore. And that just sets the stage for the grim reality that was about to be uncovered.
Look, the bottom line is this. Modern aircraft from manufacturers like Airbus and Boeing are incredibly complex machines. Without a steady official supply of parts, software updates, and maintenance support, just keeping them safely in the air becomes a massive, and I mean massive, and very risky challenge.
But, perhaps the most alarming evidence all this comes from inside Russia itself. The country's own aviation regulators did their own inspections, and what they found? Well, it paints a deeply worrying picture of the entire commercial fleet.
So over a 2-year period, Russia's own State Aviation Supervision Agency found safety violations on, get this, 480 different commercial aircraft. Let me be clear, that's 480 planes that were actively flying passengers even though they had documented safety problems.
The sheer scale of this is just staggering. That number, 480, represents nearly half of Russia's entire commercial fleet.
This isn't about a few isolated incidents or a few bad apples. The agency's own report points to systemic safety issues across the whole industry. And we're not talking about minor stuff here, like a tray table that won't lock. The regulator found evidence of falsified maintenance records, defective aircraft being systematically approved for flight, fictitious work just being made up and put in the logs, and even unauthorized structural repairs being made without any proper oversight.
If you really want to understand the official mindset here, you just have to listen to this unbelievable quote. This came from the head of the Aviation Authority himself. When he was confronted with all these findings, he reportedly said, "Yes, we falsified it, but this work does not pose a threat to flight safety." Wow, that is a direct admission of falsification from the very man whose job it is to guarantee safety.
So, what happens when you bring these two crises together? The external war in the skies and the internal rot in maintenance. Well, you get Russia's perfect storm for civil aviation. It really is a crisis on two fronts, isn't it? Externally, you have these constant drone attacks, you've got jumpy air defense crews and sudden airport closures. And then internally, you have this decay, falsified maintenance, a huge shortage of parts, and a fleet that's being cannibalized just to stay in the air. And what's worse is that each of these problems makes the other one far, far more dangerous. So when you combine a volatile, active conflict zone with a fleet whose safety is being systematically compromised, that margin for error, it just shrinks to almost nothing. The sources really paint a picture of an aviation system that's trapped between attacks from the outside and decay from the inside. And it leaves you with one critical question about the future of flying in Russia.